The Caribbean looks calm tonight. Not one thing is moving through it. Three things are. One rides the wind, one hides in the air, and one keeps shifting under the sea floor. And almost none of them look dangerous until they are already close. If you like real science told like a mystery instead of a fairy tale, subscribe and stay with me. The strangest stories are usually the ones happening in plain sight. When most people hear the word Caribbean, they picture still water, bright beaches, and lazy heat. That image is not fake, but it is incomplete. The real Caribbean is not a quiet postcard. It is a crossing point. Air from Africa moves into it. Storm seeds slide into it. Huge plates of earth grind under it. And all of that is active right now, at the same time, whether a headline notices it or not. That is why this region can feel peaceful at breakfast, dusty by noon, stormy by sunset, and trembling before dawn. What looks like one simple sea is really a meeting place for sky, ocean, and rock. And this week, each one of those layers is sending a signal. To understand why that matters, it helps to step back for a second. The Caribbean sits between North America and South America, and between the open Atlantic and Central America. That makes it a doorway. Weather systems often travel west across the Atlantic and pass through this doorway on their way toward the islands, the Gulf, or the Americas. At the same time, the ground under the region is cut by faults, which are cracks where giant slabs of earth push, pull, and slide. So the Caribbean is never only one story. It is many stories stacked on top of each other. A tourist may notice blue water. A pilot notices hazy air. A fisherman notices rough trade winds. A seismologist notices tiny shakes. All of them are looking at the same place. Now here is the first surprise. People often think the Caribbean only becomes important when a named hurricane appears on a map. That sounds reasonable, but it is wrong. Long before a storm earns a name, the region fills with smaller moving pieces that set the stage. The most important of those pieces right now are tropical waves. A tropical wave is not an ocean wave. It is a long wrinkle in the air, a weak bend in pressure that moves from east to west. Think of it like a fold traveling through warm, moist air. Sometimes that fold stays weak and only brings clouds and rain. Sometimes it becomes the starting point for something much bigger. So when forecasters track tropical waves, they are not looking at nothing. They are watching early chapters, not final headlines. On August 5, 2026, the National Hurricane Center says tropical cyclone formation is not expected in the Atlantic, the Caribbean Sea, or the nearby Gulf during the next 7 days. To many people, that sounds like a full all clear. But on that same day, the center is also tracking several tropical waves. One is along 26 degrees west in the eastern Atlantic. Another is along 43 degrees west, farther out over open water. And one more is already in the western Caribbean, near 82 degrees west, stretching south from the Cayman Islands. The first two are moving west at about 5 to 10 knots, which is roughly 6 to 12 miles per hour. The western Caribbean wave is moving near 10 knots. So even in a week with no expected cyclone, the conveyor belt is still running. That western Caribbean wave matters most for people living in the region right now because it is not just a line on a map. The latest discussion says it is linked to scattered, moderate, and isolated strong convection from the lee of Cuba to the Gulf of Honduras. Convection is a simple idea with a fancy name. It just means warm air rises, builds clouds, and can produce showers or thunderstorms. So this wave is already helping the sky do work. It is stirring the western part of the basin even while no named storm forms. And that is the pattern people often miss. The public expects a clean split between calm and dangerous, but nature almost never works that way. There is usually a middle stage, a restless stage, where pieces move first and only later decide what they will become. There is more. The Caribbean is also dealing with strong trade winds right now. Trade winds are the steady east winds that push across the tropics. In the south-central Caribbean, forecasters report fresh to strong easterly winds and seas of 8 to 11 feet. 11 feet is taller than many people standing upright. Forecasts say those winds could build to near gale strength into the weekend as pressure stays higher to the north and lower over northern South America. That means even without a tropical cyclone, the sea can still turn rough, especially for small boats. It also means the region stays busy at the surface while people on land may think nothing unusual is happening. Calm headlines and active water can exist at the same time. That is one of the central mysteries of this week. And here is where the story gets deeper. If you only looked for spinning storms, you might think the Atlantic machine has paused. But the machine has not paused. It has shifted mode. The eastern Atlantic waves near 26 and 43 west show the supply line is still active. The western Caribbean wave near 82 west shows one of those pieces has already entered the region. The strong trades show the background flow is alive. And thunderstorm clusters from near Cuba to the Gulf of Honduras show the atmosphere is still finding ways to release energy. The expected story was simple. No storm means not much to watch. The actual story is more subtle. The region is full of movement, but the movement is not lining up into one giant rotating system yet. That difference matters because it tells us the danger is delayed, not erased. Did you expect a storm-free forecast to still hide this much motion? If that changes the way you see the map, hit like and tell me which part surprises you most. And if you enjoy real answers instead of easy headlines, subscribe before the next reveal. So why are these waves not exploding into hurricanes right now? One reason is above them, not inside them. Some forecasters say the atmosphere over the basin still looks hostile for development. Hostile, in weather language, means the air is not helping storms organize. Winds higher up can blow across the tops of growing thunderstorms and tear their structure apart. Dry air can slip in and choke off the moist core a storm needs. Even if warm water waits below, the sky above can still say no. That is why a tropical wave can travel for days and never become famous. The public often expects warm tropical water to act like a simple fuel tank. But storms are pickier than that. They need fuel, yes, but they also need space, moisture, and a stable shape. Take away one of those pieces, and the whole system struggles. And that brings us to the second thing moving through the Caribbean right now, which is not a storm at all. It is dust. Not local dust from dry roads or construction. Saharan dust. Very fine mineral dust lifted from the Sahara in North Africa and carried west across the Atlantic inside a hot, dry air mass called the Saharan air layer. This happens every year in late spring, summer, and early fall. So the idea itself is not new. What people forget is just how far this dust travels and how much it changes the feel of the Caribbean when it arrives. It can cross thousands of miles of ocean, survive the trip, and still reach the islands strong enough to change the sky, the air, and even the odds of storm growth. That is not a side note. It is a major part of the region's summer story. At first, dust sounds almost harmless. Many people imagine a thin brown veil, pretty sunsets, maybe a dirty car. That is the expected picture. The actual picture is more serious. Saharan dust is usually tied to very dry air, and that dry air can push into tropical weather systems and weaken them. For storm hunters, that can be good news. For people with asthma or other breathing trouble, it can be bad news. The same plume that helps keep a storm from organizing can also make the air harder to breathe. That is one of the strange trade-offs happening over the Caribbean. A force that lowers one risk can raise another. And because dust is spread through the air rather than spinning on radar like a storm, people often underestimate it. But the lungs do not care whether a hazard looks dramatic on television. They only care what comes in with each breath. In early August 2026, weather coverage is already talking about Saharan dust continuing to spread across the tropical Atlantic from Africa, while the hurricane basin stays quiet. That quiet is not random. Dust is part of the reason. The dry air it carries helps make the wider Atlantic and parts of the Caribbean less friendly for tropical development. This does not mean dust alone controls everything. It does not. But it is part of the lock on the door right now. Tropical waves are still passing through the basin, yet many are struggling to find a moist, gentle environment where they can stack thunderstorms around a center. Imagine trying to build a tall tower out of smoke while someone keeps blowing across it. That is what hostile air can do to a young tropical system. It lets motion happen without letting order fully form. This is not just theory pulled from old textbooks. During recent dust outbreaks earlier this season, air quality alerts were issued in parts of the Caribbean. Reports described a large Saharan plume affecting areas such as Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, Puerto Rico, the Windward Islands, and the Colombian Caribbean. Health officials warned that sensitive groups could feel the effects more strongly. People were urged to limit exposure, reduce hard outdoor activity, close windows when needed, and use cleaner indoor air if possible. That matters because dust stories are often told like weather trivia, not like public health stories. But for many families, the effect is personal. A child with asthma does not experience Saharan dust as a scientific wonder. They experience it as tight breathing, irritated eyes, and a day that suddenly feels heavier. The sky can look bright while the air quietly gets worse. And there is another twist. Dust can also reduce visibility. That means the horizon can look washed out. Mountains can seem farther away than they are. Flights, boating decisions, and even simple daily routines can feel different when the air turns hazy. Drivers notice the sun looks pale. Photographers notice colors shift. Fishermen notice the distance line over the sea loses some sharpness. Most people think of danger as something loud, fast, and obvious. But dust works in the opposite way. It arrives without thunder, without spinning bands, and without the emotional drama of a named storm. It changes the whole room by entering silently. That may be why it remains one of the least understood forces in the Caribbean summer, even though satellites track it year after year. People do not fear what they cannot easily point at. That does not make it small. The Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology keeps a 7-day dust prediction tool running for the region, and that alone tells you something important. Dust is not treated like a random curiosity. It is tracked like a real part of Caribbean life. Forecasters use regional models, satellite views, and outside dust products to watch where plumes are moving and how thick they may become. In other words, the islands do not wait for the haze to show up and then guess. They watch for it in advance, the same way they watch for heavy rain or rough surf. That is a major clue about how serious this is. When a region builds routine tools around a problem, it means the problem is normal enough to plan for and strong enough to matter. Dust season is not a rumor. It is part of the calendar, even when tourists never hear about it. Now add the weather pieces together. Tropical waves are moving west. Dust is spreading across the tropical Atlantic and into the wider basin. Strong trade winds are pushing over the Caribbean, and the result is a strange mix. The region can stay mostly quiet in terms of storm formation while still feeling unsettled on a local level. That gap between expectation and reality is what makes this story so interesting. Most people want a simple answer. Is it safe or is it dangerous? Is it calm or is it active? But the Caribbean right now is both calm and active depending on which layer you look at. A pilot, a sailor, a person with asthma, and a storm forecaster can all be telling the truth at once while describing very different versions of the same day. That is not confusion. That is the system revealing how many parts it really has. Have you ever thought a clear sky could still be carrying a problem from another continent? If that detail caught you off guard, leave a comment and tap like. And subscribe if you want the parts of science that usually get left out. Now we go below the water, because the third thing happening in the Caribbean right now is the oldest and maybe the most unsettling of all: earthquakes. Unlike tropical waves and dust, earthquakes do not arrive from somewhere else. They come from the ground already under the region, and the Caribbean sits on a complicated boundary zone where giant tectonic plates meet. A tectonic plate is a huge slab of Earth's outer shell. These slabs move very slowly, but they never fully stop. Where they meet, pressure builds. In some places, one plate dives beneath another. In some places, they scrape sideways. In some places, they bend and break. The islands may look still, but the crust below them is part of a restless machine. That machine has produced famous disasters in the past, but it also produces many smaller quakes that most people never hear about. Right now, that smaller motion is very much alive. Here is the usual expectation. People imagine earthquake danger as one giant event separated by long silence. A big shake happens, everyone talks about it, then the danger seems to vanish until the next disaster film begins in the mind. But real earthquake regions are often noisy in a quieter way. They creak, slip, and adjust constantly. Small and moderate earthquakes can happen again and again as stress moves through faults and deeper plate boundaries. That does not mean a major quake is about to happen tomorrow. It also does not mean the region is sleeping. It means the crust is always negotiating with itself. In the Caribbean, that negotiation is shaped by the motion between the Caribbean plate and the North American plate, along with other nearby plate edges. Northern islands like Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Hispaniola live especially close to this active zone. The beauty of the islands hides that tension well. Look at the recent numbers, and the quiet becomes hard to believe. A U.S. Geological Survey event feed covering August 1st through August 5th, 2026, in a broad Caribbean box, shows 25 earthquakes of magnitude 3.0 or higher. That does not mean every island is shaking violently. Magnitude 3 quakes are often small to moderate and may pass unnoticed by many people, especially if they happen offshore or deep underground. But 25 events in only a few days is a reminder that the region is busy below the surface. The list includes a magnitude 4.5 earthquake near Sanchez in the Dominican Republic, a magnitude 4.6 event near Belen in Nicaragua, and several magnitude 3 plus quakes near Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Some were shallow, some were much deeper. None of the examples in that set carried a tsunami alert. Still, the pattern matters. The cluster north and northeast of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands is especially revealing. In just this short recent stretch, earthquakes included a magnitude 3.8, about 89 kilometers northeast of Cruz Bay in the U.S. Virgin Islands, a magnitude 3.5, about 69 kilometers northwest of San Antonio, Puerto Rico, and a magnitude 3.7, roughly 107 kilometers north-northeast of Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic. Those numbers can sound dry, but they are useful. They show motion scattered across a belt, not pinned to one exact point. They also show different depths. The event near Cruz Bay was over 100 kilometers deep, while the one northwest of San Antonio was shallow, around 7 kilometers. Deep earthquakes happen farther down inside Earth. Shallow ones are closer to the surface and can be felt differently. The region is not shaking in one simple way. It is shaking through layers. That depth difference matters because it hints at different parts of the plate system doing different things. A shallow quake can point to stress released closer to the crust people live on. A deeper quake may be tied to a slab moving far below, where one plate sinks under another. You do not need advanced geology to understand the big idea. The Caribbean is not just cracked on top. It is structured in 3 dimensions. Pressure exists across distance and depth. That is why one area can feel a brief local jolt, while another part of the same region shows deeper motion far offshore. It also explains why earthquake maps here can look scattered to the casual eye, but meaningful to experts. The dots are not random noise. They are clues from a system with many moving surfaces. Small shakes are the punctuation marks of a longer sentence the planet is still writing. There is a deeper historical shadow behind all this. The northeastern Caribbean has seen very large earthquakes before. One of the biggest in that region since 1900 was the August 4, 1946 Hispaniola event, commonly listed at magnitude 8.0. Quakes like that stay in the memory of scientists because they show what the plate boundary is capable of under the right conditions. That is why even a week filled mostly with modest quakes still gets attention. Not because every small earthquake is a warning that a giant one is next, but because each one confirms the system is active. Experts cannot tell you the exact day of the next major event. What they can say is that the plate boundary has not gone away. It is still there, still loaded, still moving in ways large and small. That is the honest, uncomfortable truth beneath the islands. And here is the part many people miss most. A small offshore earthquake and a dusty sky may feel like separate stories. They are not. They are separate symptoms of the same deeper reality, which is that the Caribbean is a place where motion is normal. The air is moving, the sea is moving, the ground is moving. Human life settles on top of this moving stage and tries to build routine. Airports run, ports stay open, kids go to school, ferries move between islands, beach chairs are set out, life goes on. But the background system never really stops. That is why local knowledge matters so much here. Residents learn to read rough water, hazy mornings, sudden rain bursts, and light shaking as part of a shared language. Visitors may only see a vacation setting. People who live there often see a living system speaking all day long. Did you know the region logged that many magnitude 3 and stronger quakes in only a few days? If that number changes how you think about the islands, press like and tell me which quake detail stayed with you. And subscribe if you want more stories where the map looks calm, but the science says otherwise. Now step back and look at all 3 layers at once. In the sky, tropical waves keep marching west. In the air, Saharan dust keeps crossing the ocean and shaping what can and cannot grow. Under the sea and islands, faults and plate boundaries keep releasing stress through small and moderate earthquakes. None of these systems asked permission to overlap. They simply do. And this week, they are doing it in a way that makes the Caribbean feel almost deceptive. There is no named hurricane dominating the screen. That makes the region seem quieter than it really is. But the truth is more interesting. Right now is not empty time. It is setup time, stress time, transition time. The big rotating drama may be absent for the moment, yet the smaller forces that control the region's daily reality are all very much switched on. That is why the phrase, happening right now, matters so much here. Right now, mariners in the south-central Caribbean are dealing with strong easterly winds and rougher seas. Right now, a Western Caribbean tropical wave is helping trigger thunderstorm activity from near Cuba toward the Gulf of Honduras. Right now, dust remains part of the wider Atlantic and Caribbean pattern that can lower storm chances while raising haze and breathing concerns. Right now, earthquake dots continue to appear around Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Hispaniola, Nicaragua, and nearby waters. None of that requires a future forecast to become real. It is already real. Some of it may stay modest, some of it may fade, some of it may build. But this is not a story about what could someday happen in theory. It is a story about an active region showing its many moving parts today. Think about how strange that is from a human point of view. You can wake up on a Caribbean island, open your window, and meet all three stories in one day without using those scientific names. You see a pale, hazy sunrise and do not know that dust from Africa may be part of it. You hear a marine warning about rough seas and do not picture the pressure pattern driving those trade winds. You notice a burst of rain and thunder and do not realize a tropical wave helped set the stage. Then later your phone lights up with news of a small offshore earthquake, and for a moment the ground story cuts through the weather story. That is how science often enters daily life. Not as one giant lesson, but as little pieces of reality bumping into your routine until you finally notice they belong together. The expected version of nature is neat. One hazard at a time, one clean map, one clear answer. The actual version is messy and layered. The Caribbean is a perfect example of that. A wave can carry moisture but fail to become a storm because the surrounding air is too dry. Dust can suppress one danger while creating another. Earthquakes can be common without turning instantly catastrophic. Strong trade winds can make seas rough during a week that seems meteorologically quiet to everyone who only checks hurricane names. Once you understand that, the region starts to make more sense. It also becomes harder to ignore. Because now every calm-looking map feels like a question. Calm in what way? Quiet for whom? Safe from which threat? The deeper you look, the less satisfied you are with simple labels. And that is a good thing. Simple labels often hide the truth. There is also a lesson here about how science changes. Years ago, many people outside the region treated Saharan dust as little more than a strange weather photo. They treated tropical waves as boring lines unless one developed quickly. They treated small earthquakes as forgettable background noise. But better satellites, better models, better air quality work, and better seismic networks have changed that view. Scientists now see these signals as connected parts of a system that affects real decisions. Hospitals care about dust. Captains care about winds and seas. Emergency planners care about quakes, even the smaller ones, because they help test communication and remind people where the weak points are. Forecasters care about waves because early structure matters. So the region has not become more mysterious because science failed. It has become more mysterious because science kept looking and found more layers than people expected. And the more layers we find, the more obvious one fact becomes. The Caribbean does not need a major disaster on a given day to deserve attention. It deserves attention because it is one of the clearest places on Earth where different natural systems meet in full public view. You can watch weather born near Africa approach islands thousands of miles away. You can see dust cross an ocean and affect daily health. You can track earthquakes along a plate boundary under some of the world's most loved coastlines. It is a living classroom, but also a place where millions of people work, raise families, and try to stay safe. That is why we should resist turning the region into either a paradise fantasy or a disaster fantasy. It is neither. It is a real place with beauty and risk happening together. That is a more honest picture, and a more useful one. So what does all of this mean for someone who does not live there? More than you might think. The Caribbean is tied to travel, trade, energy routes, shipping, fisheries, tourism, and weather downstream from the islands. What starts there rarely stays there. Tropical waves can continue west. Dust can drift farther and affect air quality beyond the islands. Earthquake and tsunami planning in the region matters because ports, cables, and supply chains matter. Even if your home is far away, the Caribbean is part of a connected system that reaches outward. And on a human level, the story matters because it teaches a bigger lesson about our world. The places we think we understand best are often the ones we have simplified the most. We know the postcard. We do not know the machine behind the postcard. Right now, the machine is visible if we are willing to look closely. What would surprise you more right now? A storm growing out of a harmless-looking wave, or clear air turning unhealthy because of dust? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you are learning something new, give the video a like. Then subscribe, because the final part of this story is the one that really sticks with you. Here is the final part. A quiet week in the Caribbean does not mean the region is safe from the season ahead. Warm ocean water is still there. Tropical waves are still coming off Africa. Atmospheric patterns can change. Dust can thin out. Upper winds can relax. In other words, the same basin that looks resistant to storm growth this week can look very different later. That is why forecasters never treat a calm stretch as the end of the story. They treat it as one chapter. This matters because people often move from panic to apathy too quickly. One scary headline makes them fear everything. One quiet forecast makes them ignore everything. Neither response is useful. The better response is watchfulness. Stay informed, understand the layers, and respect the fact that the Caribbean can change mood very fast once the ingredients line up in the same place. The earthquake side of the story carries its own hard truth. No one can point to a cluster of smaller quakes and tell you with certainty when the next major Caribbean earthquake will happen. Science is not magic. It can map risk, monitor motion, and study past events, but it cannot give a perfect countdown. That uncertainty can feel frustrating, yet it is also why preparation matters so much. You do not prepare because a scientist promises a date. You prepare because the region has a known history, a known plate boundary, and a known record of ongoing motion. Recent small quakes north of Puerto Rico, near the Virgin Islands, around Hispaniola, and farther west near Nicaragua are reminders of the living system below. They are not a movie trailer for one exact future event. They are a steady message that the crust has not gone still, not even for a day. The weather side offers a similar warning against overconfidence. People sometimes hear that dust suppresses storms and assume the danger is solved, but suppression is not deletion. It is delay or resistance. A tropical wave that struggles this week can still help moisten the basin for what comes next. A dusty pattern can break. A rough patch of upper winds can shift. And once those barriers weaken, the same sea that refused to organize a storm can suddenly become much more welcoming. That is why the National Hurricane Center can honestly say no tropical cyclone formation is expected over the next 7 days, while forecasters still watch every wave. The words are not contradictory. They describe different timescales. One tells you what is unlikely now, the other watches what could matter later. Good forecasting lives inside that tension. I think that is what makes the Caribbean so emotionally powerful. It reminds us that nature is not a set of separate channels. The sky does not work alone. The ocean does not work alone. The ground does not work alone. Human life sits where all of them meet. Right now, somewhere in the Caribbean, one person is checking a marine report before taking a boat out. Another is closing a window because the air feels dusty. Another feels a light quake and waits a second to see if it grows stronger. None of those moments look connected from the street. But from above and below, they are all pages from the same book. That is the kind of truth science can reveal when we stop asking for one big villain and start paying attention to the whole scene. And maybe that is the deepest mystery here. The Caribbean is often shown as a place people go to escape the noise of the world. Yet the region itself is full of signals, full of movement, full of messages traveling through wind and water and stone. It is not silent. We just do not always know how to hear it. Tropical waves say the season is still feeding the basin. Dust says another continent can reach across the ocean and touch daily life. Earthquakes say the ground itself is unfinished work. Put those together, and the region stops looking like a still picture. It starts looking like a living engine. Beautiful, yes. Fragile in places, yes. But most of all, active. And that is the real story of what is happening in the Caribbean right now. So if this changed the way you see the region, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss what happens next. In the comments, tell me which of the three feels most important to you right now: the tropical waves, the Saharan dust, or the earthquakes. And share this with someone who thinks calm weather means nothing is going on. Thank you so much for watching.